We know you. We've seen you like this before. Is it over, or is it just beginning? Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Okay, いかがですか? Watanabe Dan desu. And welcome to today's episode of Hollywood Rants. Today we're going to go over the state of the entertainment industry and discuss exactly what is going on in Hollywood. I believe our last update was sometime at the end of April. And between the end of April and now, the industry has undergone both an incredible resurgence and a lot of good news in spite of the pandemic running rampant throughout the world, but it has also gone through a lot of turmoil. And so we're going to try to summarize all of that as quickly as possible, and yet still try to give you some sense of why things are changing and what the opportunities will be. Because unlike any time in the recent past, the opportunities are even more immense than I had even thought they could possibly be. However, they're not going to necessarily be easy. Just because there's an opportunity there doesn't mean it's going to be simple to access it. But whoever said entertainment was a simple career, right? Let's start out with some of the big players, and in fact, the biggest player of them all, the Walt Disney Company. At the beginning of 2020, the Walt Disney Company was flying high. In fact, it looked as if Robert Iger, who was in charge of the Walt Disney Company, was at the point where he was quite literally inviolate. There was absolutely nothing he could do that could possibly be wrong. In fact, Disney was flying so high, it had just bought 20th Century Fox. Not all of it, of course, and yes, they did in fact spend a lot more on it than they should, but nonetheless, they now had a complete control of the Fox library in addition to their own library, and that meant that they had a great chunk of the Marvel Universe now fully under their control, which was one of the reasons they wanted it, as well as an immense library that should be able to help ultimately with Disney Plus. Well, never say that pride didn't come before the fall, because by the time we get into April and May, that entire facade of where Disney had been so triumphant and so powerful had all but completely shattered. Let's look at some of the reasons why. The number one reason that Disney is in such trouble right now is that Bob Iger, for all of his genius as a Wall Street maven, for all of his ability to look like he had the Midas touch and knowing exactly what assets the company should buy, how much he should pay for them, maybe not the case with Fox, shall we say, but how to actually maximize the revenue potential from it. The problem with all of that was that he didn't necessarily have a good hand on the operations of the company. Yes, he was able to put it together and it always looked fantastic in a portfolio. But if you do not manage your operations properly, it doesn't matter how well you can do a PowerPoint presentation in front of stockholders. Eventually, karma will catch up with you. And boy, did it. What the big thing that had been keeping Disney afloat and looking mighty and inviolate was the fact that it had the parks. And what the parks were providing Disney with was approximately $30 million a day in revenue. Not profit, it's very important, it's not profit, it's revenue. But that's nonetheless an incredible amount of money. And under that amount of cash flow coming in, certainly something like Solo, which was a massive disaster, was just a week or so of park revenue. So it didn't look all that cataclysmic. You want to get rid of your number one show on ABC? Why not? Because we've got $30 million coming in a day. So what? ABC is a legacy asset anyway, and you know it's kind of a trophy piece, but not much beyond that. We've kind of infuriated the fans of Lucasfilm and a 40-year-old franchise. Who cares? Let Kathleen Kennedy go out there and say the Force is female and make fun of the original fans and basically say, oh, you know, Galaxy's Edge, let's go in there and make it only the new stuff, because who cares about that old crap that was made in the 70s? Those people are dying out anyways if she herself wasn't pushing 70 years old. So there was this incredible amount of hubris that was running through the companies. What happened because of COVID? You're right. The park shut down. Now, all of a sudden, that $30 million a day has disappeared. And that means that people are looking at other things that are going on within the Walt Disney Company and seeing, shall we say, a picture that is hardly pretty. Let's talk about some of the issues. Number one, how much they paid for 20th Century Fox. In 2017, 20th Century Fox had been valued on Wall Street as being worth approximately $45 billion all in. Disney spent $71 billion for a portion of it. The portions that they were not allowed to bring in were Fox Network and to a certain degree Fox News, not as if Disney, which we all know is a super woke company, which is not a wise move. You're talking about 8% of the population, not an overwhelming majority. So, you know, be careful of making sure you maintain your audiences, right? So here comes Disney, spending $71 billion minus, mind you, Fox Network and Fox News, which are two of their real trophy properties. If you think about it, Fox News being regularly at the very top of traditional broadcasting. Yeah, it's old, so what? It's still every bit as much of a crown jewel as ABC. In fact, arguably much more successful. So you have Disney spending $71 billion for it, and it didn't even include the land that's under it. Now, I don't know for those of you outside of California, but we have a thing called Prop 13. And as long as you remain under more or less your same corporate, you don't have your property reassessed reassessed unless it changes hands. So that means 20th Century Fox's land, which they've owned since I believe the 1920s, is assessed at the purchase price from way back then. So can we say that that's hardly any money at all relative to the fact that it's in a really, really expensive area of town? And despite the fact that it's been parceled off and created Century City, it's still a large, large, large piece of real estate. Not something that you should just cavalierly carve out of a deal. But anyway, so they don't have the land either. They've leased it for X amount of years. So if I was on the board, I would be looking at that going, wow, why did you do that? Why did you spend so much of a premium over the asking price simply because you needed the revenues that desperately? That was, by the way, a sign that there was a problem going on, that they needed that revenue that comes in from Fox in order to shore up maybe some other shall we say, problem areas, such as the failure of the first Pixar movie ever. So there was a lot of challenges that were coming up from that have now been revealed. Worse, how was the transaction done? Was it done as cash? No, it was a stock swap. So that means that now the number one minority shareholder in Disney is, guess who? The people who had massive shares in Fox. Guess who else has a massive share in Disney? George Lucas. Don't you think that George Lucas is not at all happy of what was done with his intellectual property and might be looking at perhaps forming a strategic alliance to screw Disney? I'm going to say that that's exactly what he has done. And I'm going to say that sooner or later, you're going to see a proxy war happen within the company, as if a company wasn't already troubled by its shall we say, fiscal issues. So now all of a sudden people are looking at Disney. Disney has had to go to Wall Street and get money from it at the tune of about $10 billion a month since the shutdown happened. This is not good news, because now you're seeing Disney pile on debt on top of debt on top of debt. And because they haven't had necessarily great returns, this is exacerbating the problem. Now let's look at Disney Plus. Now Disney Plus was looked at as perhaps being one of the biggest challenges possible to Netflix. And I mean, think about all the libraries that it has within it. Think about the captive audience that you would have for Disney Plus. Think about the initial launch of Disney Plus when we had The Mandalorian being a massive showpiece and bringing a ton of interest into the streaming service. Think about what's happened since then. The Mandalorian has ended. What does that mean? That means the people who subscribe to the service and were primarily interested in The Mandalorian have had plenty of time to say, I've kind of had enough of it. Guess what else? A large chunk of those people did choose to say ta-ta. Let's be honest about it. From the time you're about 13 until the time you have kids of your own who are old enough to watch Disney movies 50 times in a row, I'm not knocking it. When I was growing up, I did the same thing, so I'm not knocking it. But other than that, you're missing a huge chunk of the main audience. So that means that a lot of those people disappeared from the service and they had no reason to come back. Worse, the older people, the altacockers who are my age, have grandkids. And so, of course, the grandkids come and visit and you want to have the channel, and you probably, because you're old and an okay boomer, you probably have enough resources to where having an additional service, even if you never watch it yourself, it's fine. It's tertiary money. Here's the challenge. Initially, it was felt that a lot of the okay boomers would be watching the Disney Plus in order to have a little bit of a flashback to our own misspent youths when we would watch The Wonderful World of Color, The Wonderful World of Disney every Sunday night, and we have nostalgic memories of the dramas that were presented and the movies that were shown and all of that. Guess what? Most of that stuff, let's kind of be honest about it, kind of sucked. So when we watch it, yeah, it's great to see Suzanne Pleshette in The Ugly Dotson, but does that mean that we necessarily are going to go on an obsession and watch the entire Herbie the Love Bug series and the 2 or 3 remakes of Escape to Witch Mountain? No, you know, a couple of those we've tripped down memory lane and found it to be not necessarily as rosy as we remember, and we're cool. So, you know, we'll just let our grandkids watch Frozen 50 times in a row again and make do with it and be very happy. We can hand the grandkids over to the parents when they come by to pick them up. But it's not something that's really driving the middle. We've seen Disney make an attempt to, shall we say, take care of that situation by bringing in certain high-key elements that they had, such as Hamilton, the live stage show of Hamilton. And that certainly did create a flurry of interest. But let's be honest about that Hamilton. Now, I know there's a lot of people who've decided they loved it. I'm saying they've said they decided they loved it because they don't want to confess to people that it was really disappointing. Why am I saying it's really disappointing? I don't think the show's bad, but let's be real. When you do something that's a live recording of a live stage show, you're not really seeing the stage show with the kind of energy that someone who was seeing it live was going to have. It's sort of like watching one of those PBS great performances where if you'd seen A Little Night Music on the stage, you're looking at it and you remember the stage thing, and it's wonderful. If you've never seen it on the stage, you kind of long for the Elizabeth Taylor movie. So you have that issue. It's not a real capturing of the energy that was there. So even though you had a certain bump in the subscribers during the period when you had Hamilton running, it certainly wasn't enough to bring in all that many more people. And now we come to Mulan. Now Mulan, I've got to tell you, this is karma like you would. I am enjoying this. I know it's a little bit of Schadenfreude, but I can't help it. Just the thought that you were going to take a movie as an animated piece that was already rather cringy as an Asian watching it, and then you were going to do it live, and you were going to make Disney kowtow to Chinese leadership, and they were going to look weak as all get out. Don't you think that there's a karmic disconnect between what your story's about, which is a brave warrior who fights against evil oligarchs, and what you yourself are doing, which is going to a major country that has probably been the root cause of the whole COVID thing, and bowing down to them and saying, oh, well, we'll do whatever you want, except we're going to keep our writer and director and our entire US style of telling a story. Can we say, and I'm saying this is an Asian, so remember it's coming from a position of extreme bias. Whenever I see something that is coming out of Hollywood that's about Asians, I want to go and hide underneath a table. It's always cringy beyond belief. There's a complete lack of understanding of what Asian culture is really about. There's a complete lack of understanding that Asian movies and TV shows do not follow three-part dramatic structure. That's a Western construct. And there's a complete contempt for the documentary details that a 3,000 plus year old civilization is going to be absolutely focused in on. Now some of it, like when I watch Memoirs of a Geisha, which is cringy and insulting, I can look at it and say, okay, whatever. Yeah, they could have looked at Sisters of the Gion and had an exact replica of what they were trying to do. They obviously didn't do it, so oh well. But when you're dealing with something like Mulan, which is a national treasure legend, and you're going to go in there and you're going to try to fit it in three-part dramatic structure, you're going to try to take out all the songs, and you're going to try to make it appeal to the Chinese Communist government in order to get the sweet yuan cash, you are absolutely making a mistake. Because if I was as an Asian, I know I'm going to watch and get infuriated, and because look, let's face it, Mulan should be modeled on Michelle Yeoh when she was in Wing Chun. When you see her intensely setting up on a fight, you see intense concentration, not extreme violence in her. But look at all the previews that we've seen in Mulan. How does she present herself? Oh yes, she's looking like a petulant child. She's looking like a Mary Sue, every bit as much as Rey did in the Star Wars stuff. So we know that they've absolutely gotten that wrong. Why didn't they hire a Chinese director? It's not as if there's a shortage of Choi Harks in China. It's not as if there's not a lot of great people. Why didn't they just take the money, shoot a Chinese movie properly, and be done with it, and just have it big and virtue signal that way? No. They decided to make it American so that it would appeal here. Now you have a movie that has zero audience. Okay, that's going to really work, right? So what are they doing? They're charging $30 in addition to having a subscription to Disney Plus in order to see it. Why did they choose that number? I'm going to say they chose that number because they have previewed the movie and it sucks. Why am I thinking it sucks? Because what better way to get new people to subscribe to the service if you had an ability to say this is the new Mulan? You get it the same way you got Hamilton. Look at how great Disney is out there. But let's say that Mulan is this year's version of The Irishman. Well, we all know what happened there, that they would have, if Irishman was good enough to have won Best Picture, there'd be no way that Netflix wouldn't have delayed their premiere of it, and they would have released it theatrically, taken home a Best Picture award, and be done with it, and have proven that they were able to diversify themselves out into the world of theatrical. Instead, they ended up with a 3.5-hour movie that was endless and kind of a rerun of the best stuff. And so you had something that was never going to really achieve that much popularity, so might as well dump it and get as many people as possible, because God knows we wasted our money. This is exactly what's happened with Mulan. I bet they tested it and people said, we don't like it. Now remember that in the world of market research, we don't like it merely means that its scoring is a very good as opposed to an excellent above normative means. So all it needed was to hit that and have people say, you know what, just wait for it to be free. And so they needed to get as much money as humanly possible, as fast as possible, before other people's word of mouth killed it. So what they've done with Mulan is they've thrown it out there with that $30 to capture as much money as they can. And look at how they've already said, oh, it's going to be free in December. Can we say that means that the pre-sales of it, I bet, were sucky? Anyway, that's where Disney is right now. Their organizational work has been just terrible. And okay, so much for that. It's now been revealed, and we'll see what happens. Good thing is that Bob Chapek, who's now running the company, came from Parks, so hopefully he'll be able to turn the company around. If not, I would say that you're probably going to see an Apple or someone like that come in and try to shore it up, because hey, the Disney has enough assets to where it can go quite a while, even being horrendously mismanaged. Now let's go to another one of our favorite studios, and that's Warner Brothers. yes, they've been in the middle of a merger. Yes, the COVID-19 has given everyone a chance to look over the books and see exactly what they bought. And I'm sure that AT&T is looking at that going, oh my God, look at this. Yes, a lot of the stuff that were in projections looked very good. And now we know that with the failure of Game of Thrones last year and with the failure of Watchmen to launch and fill in that gap, we have HBO being severely crippled, and yet they're spending money like drunken sailors on shore leave. So why would we not come in with a heavy hand and say, guys, you have not been doing a good job with any of this. Add to that their debacle with the whole Gone with the Wind situation. I mean, can we say that you have the most valuable legacy library and you have the most valuable piece of it, and you're basically telling the world, we don't support our most treasured asset. We're joining with the intersectionalists saying this movie is racist, and if you like it, you're a bigot and a racist, and we hate you. That's not a good way to take your big assets and leverage them, is it? You could have done it much better. You could have done it without causing a whole kerfluffle out of it. But did you? No. You jumped in because Twitter told you to, which doesn't represent the public at large. It really doesn't. And so now you've infuriated your fan base. Wow, good job there. And can we mention they've now done it with Blazing Saddles? Okay, so I one time had an acquaintance, and I'm not going to be too specific on the details because that's not, because it can probably be traced back to exactly who this is, who I knew casually, and one time I was at a party and he was complaining because he was a very big wig in the world of home video. And he basically said, I don't understand why we have to spend so much time on this S word when he was talking about the restoration work that was being done on their library. And he said only F words and losers like this C word. And I'm thinking, wow, you have over $100 million, and this is almost 20 years ago, of cash coming in on stuff that was made 70 years ago. I would think that that's something you do want to kind of keep in your asset portfolio and not disdain it and not call the people who like it by pejorative names. But no, let's face it, when you're at a cocktail party hanging out with your other friends having cocaine and canapes, you're wanting to prove how cool you are and how soigné you are and how, oh, you're not really into this Hollywood stuff. You're just there for the money because you're just so spectacular. And that is an attitude that's running through the industry, and it's called throwing money away or leaving money on the table. So, and especially in an industry that's believing in remakes of everything, how can you say, let's remake something and not even know what the original was? Okay, yeah, that's a smart move. So Warner Brothers has tripled down on disaster with all of this stuff. So, okay, do you, I guess. So now the day of reckoning is in, and there's a lot of stuff happening. Most of the executive staff has been told bye-bye, and let's see what their next move is. I do have faith this is going to work out, because after all, look what happened when Comcast took over Universal. I admit that I was rather negative about that deal, and it turned out to be spectacular. Comcast has been very, very good about understanding who the audience is and treasuring it. Plus they have Jason Blum there, who out of everybody who's been in Hollywood of recent is the only one who seems to remember that profit and losses mean something, and has therefore kept his budgets down, kept his revenues high, and been an ultimate winner. But since we're talking about Universal, what happened at Universal? Ron Meyer was Me Too'd out of his job. He's been there since 1995. And arguably, he's one of the best CEOs in the business. What is he doing? Especially when the woman he allegedly had his affair with is someone who already took down another big player at another company. What are you doing? Don't you know when someone's walking in the door, no matter how sexy they are, if they've already taken down another company by blackmail and extortion, you better keep away from them. I'm not justifying his behavior. It sucks. But looking at the tradition of Hollywood and looking at Harvey Weinstein as if he was a first, he certainly wasn't. You can go all the way back to 100 years and find people who did the same kind of unacceptable, execrable behavior. And they've always more or less gotten away with it. So why should somebody today think it's any different? Even though there is there was the Me Too movement, there were similar outrages in the past, and it never seemed to last for long. So and I hate to put it that way, but that's just the way it is. You gotta, we have to be honest about how the industry behaves. It doesn't behave well ever. So why should that have changed, right? Anyway, so he gets thrown out. Who's going to take that over now? I'm hoping they find someone who is competent. Speaking of somebody else who was removed from Me Too, let's move over now to Paramount. What's going on at Paramount? Paramount is doing their very, very best to go from being a major to being a mini major. And one of the things that was particularly humiliating for them is when they had to sell their CBS lot. Now, in real estate, I mean, in entertainment, when you have a trophy property such as the old William Morris building on El Camino or the CBS studio on Beverly and Fairfax, you do not sell that thing. Why? Because if nothing else, it tells everyone in town that you absolutely were pushed against the wall, facing bankruptcy or something worse, and you had to sell perhaps your most valuable asset. So once they did that, you already knew that they were in trouble. But Paramount has remerged between the CBS side of the company and the Viacom Paramount side, with a lot of the efficiencies that were in there, but still maintaining at the very top of the pyramid the Redstone family, who've been treating the company as if it was a private company as opposed to a publicly traded one. But hey, that's Hollywood, right? They'll spend money, profligately, cook your books, whatever. Anyway, so Les Moonves, who I think was actually gotten rid of because I think he was going to challenge the leadership of the new company, being that he kept CBS afloat and on top of the network world for the better part of his entire stint there. So he's hardly someone that you wouldn't want to run your whole company remerged. So I think he was gotten rid of because he was threatening the Redstone bloodline. Anyway. And it's his own fault. I'm not justifying it. It's his own fault. But with Moonves out, you now have CBS very, very, very crippled there. So we'll see what's going to happen with them long term. It was especially tragic that they had a new Terminator movie that was coming out. In fact, they delayed their stockholder meeting where they would have to reveal that they had sold the property and then come up with a reason for that. And I think that they wanted to say, but look, we have this Terminator movie, we relaunched the franchise, and look at what a big success it is. Okay, it failed miserably, and anybody who was involved in the development and creation of it should really be out of a job right now, because why would you take a franchise that was already old and already had a lot of bad sequels already? Why would you go and make it worse? Okay, that seems to be Hollywood's trend right now. Sony was a company that I thought was going to be on the tenterhooks. I mean, with all the stuff that's going on with Sony Japan, the thought that they'd be able to make the US side, which had that wonderful Ghostbusters disaster, was going to keep that going. But no, what did Sony do? Japan's still a mess. But in the US, they got rid of Amy Pascal and her little cadre of friends who develop stuff that costs a lot of money and fails. And so the company kind of settled in on their hard assets, which is game shows. Remember, they have Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune under there. And so they've become strongly profitable. And so Apple, which I think had been sniffing around them, thinking of buying them, because after all, hey, you have a nice campus here. We can do research and development or all this other stuff, and you got a tremendous library that's not been broken up since the 1930s, and we certainly aren't going to treat it badly the way Warner Brothers does. So that they've actually done a good job, I think. Now this is all subject to change. Maybe next month when I do my September update, it'll all fall apart. But as of right now, Sony's done the right moves, and I think it's going to be solid moving forward. Let's move over now to Netflix. Netflix has been given a new lease on life. And what do I mean by a new lease on life? Well, look at where they were 5 months ago. Yes, they were on top of the game. Yes, they were the go-to, but they had a lot of debt. And I mean, Netflix wasn't known as being the further west version of the Polo Lounge for nothing. You would have agents and producers and the hobnobby of the Hollywood elite hanging out in their lobby simply to be seen and trade stories about how much they were going to get for a certain package, where they were going to spend far more for an episode than anyone else in their right mind would spend, simply because Netflix was trying to buy its way into respectability. And sure enough, what's been happening with Netflix is, even though it's hegemonic in terms of its subscriber base, it was starting to go down in terms of its US subscribers, and it was starting to underperform in terms of new subscribers internationally. COVID hits, and Netflix, because people are stuck in their houses, has increased their subscriber base a lot. In fact, I might be wrong on this, but I believe the number of new subscribers to Netflix equals the new subscribers to all the other streaming services combined. So they've actually gotten a reprieve. If they can handle their cash flow situation, I think they're going to be able to stage a comeback. However, Netflix is burdened by a problem that every company is having right now, and that is there's too much content. And we look at that and go, how can there be too much content? There's too much content. In the old days, you had a limited number of movies that were released. You had a limited number of networks. You even had a somewhat limited number of cable channels. So if something was making a big impact on the public, everyone would be aware of it. Imagine we flash back 50 years. Most of the population, whether they watch TV or not, would know about CBS's Murderer's Row on Saturday night, where they ran from All in the Family to MASH to Mary Tyler Moore Show to Bob Newhart Show to Cabernet Show. And everyone knew those characters. Everyone knew the program. Plus, it was kept at a fairly low budget. And plus, there were a lot of episodes each season, so you knew that even if you didn't have the money to exactly have a profit on the show on its first airing, through reruns, you would make that profit. Now you have hundreds of shows, and each of those shows on Netflix is not doing 22 to 26 episodes a year. They're only doing 6 to 10. So that means that when the show ends, there's not even a heck of a lot of episodes that you have to deal with. So there is no aftermarket. And this is the biggest problem that's facing Hollywood as a whole economically, is not only have costs escalated because of the amount of money Netflix was willing to spend, but there's now only one window. What do I mean by that? Originally, when I entered the business, there were multiple windows. You had your theatrical window. The second window you had was home video, which was huge. That was the one where everyone made money. So you can consider that Netflix right now. Following home video, you would have a pay cable run. And that pay cable run was when it would show on HBO. Now, yes, the home video had quite knocked some of that revenue out, but it was still a lot of money. Beneath that would be a network television premiere, which, again, because of the crippling of both home video and HBO, was rapidly shrinking the value of that window. So that window actually did disappear fairly quick, fairly soon after all of this. After that, you would have your free cable. Not free, basic cable, and your first run syndication run of the film, where you would, it's a long, complicated business thing. We won't even go into that, but you would make some money there. And then finally it would become cash syndication, where for a certain amount of money, you'd buy a package of films and you would rerun them for a 5-year period, and that could go on into eternity. And for many movies, it would take out your revenues at least 5 to 10 years after the picture was made. It was a very good system. Now, with we have a single window. We only have the streaming window. Yes, home video has increased really, really insanely in the past quarter, especially after the Gone with the Wind debacle and Disney saying they're not going to release any of their titles in the future, and with the fact that people are now pulling episodes out of series because they offend Twitter. You're seeing people saying, "Oh, I'm going to have to buy the DVD. I got to have my physical media store of this stuff because I don't know what idiocy the content owners are going to be having moving in the future." So there's been a bump in home video. So we might have 1.5 windows now, but all of the television and the cable windows are now basically valueless, because when something shows up on Netflix, until the contract expires, it stays there. Plus you have all of the individual other streaming services, which, even though they're failures right now, still take up a nice portion of real estate. So you really don't have any other window. You're stuck. So you deficited as a studio a lot of money on something. Ain't no way for you to get it back. And that's kind of the situation that Netflix is finding itself in. It's got this incredible library of things, and no one to sell it to other than themselves. Does that help if you're swimming in debt and your new subscribers are, even under the best of circumstances, tapering off because, hey, Netflix has kind of reached critical mass in the United States where the people who wanted to get it have gotten it. So it's got a fairly far market penetration in the country. So it's, their actual ability to grow more in the U.S. is fairly limited. And yeah, the foreign piece is expanding, but most of the shows that Netflix has that could go on their individual foreign stations don't have the rights, because in order to bring down the cost of production, they've made deals with the different countries where they've kept the rights to those movies and TV shows that were premiering. So therefore, they run it on their own systems, not on Netflix. Okay, now we got a content gap. So anyway, Netflix, that's the issue. Now let's get to the big piece of sensational news, and that is what's been going on with the Writers Guild. Since the 80s, the big talent agencies, whenever they've had several times when they've been the dominant force in the industry, and they happen to right now be moving out of that position for the most recent iteration of it. In the 80s, CAA came up with the process of doing packaging of projects. And what those packages were is that you would take the star that you represented, you would take the writer who you represented and the director who you represented, put it in a package, and rather than the production company paying and the talent paying a 10% commission fee, you would instead pay the agency a percentage of the budget for having put the package together. They would also be entitled to a big piece of the back end. So the profits, if any, and I bet you they're gross profits in most instances right now. So yes, there is money coming in because it's revenue before recoupment. So what happened with that is it's kind of put a squeeze. It's gotten rid of a lot of independent producers. Because why do you need an independent producer when an agent is going to do the packaging and for you? So yeah, you're not getting the best people for each role or the necessarily compatible artist, but it's all coming in from one place. If you're going to have to pay a package fee, why do you need an independent producer? Why do you need a producer in the middle of all this? Get rid of them, right? And so that's what's happened. But in spite of the fact that the big 5 agencies, and Endeavor in particular, control 80% of every single project that's being done in town right now, they're still spending more than they were making. How? I have no clue. It's profligacy on a criminal level. It has to be. So Endeavor and the Writers Guild, decided that they were going to fight the big battle, which is that Endeavor was planning on doing its own productions, thereby meaning that they would be dealing with talent within themselves. If you're going to make a movie, you're going to use Endeavor talent, guess what? How are you going to negotiate a good payday for your client? Or how are you going to, for the members of your union? You got a vertically integrated company. They can say, oh yeah, you got a big showrunner. We'll give them $5 million an episode and call it a day, which is nice. It's very rich. But that also means your down market talent is going to get paid scale plus 10. Not so good, is it? That means if you're a journeyman actor, you're a journeyman director, or you're a journeyman writer, you don't get opportunities anymore, do you? Because you're now competition with the big talents that are bringing in the money. This happens to be illegal. Lou Wasserman in 1962, when he was the head of MCA and they just bought Universal, was trying to do that trick. And can we say the government stepped in and said, no, you're not? And he had to make a choice between being a talent manager and a producer. He rightfully chose being a producer, and the rest is history. But that law has been there ever since. Here you have Endeavor wanting to do their own production. Writers Guild says, oh, wait a minute here. You're not going to be able to do that. But obviously, Endeavor was feeling they had some inside track in DC, and they thought maybe they could get rid of that annoying little law. But it didn't happen, right? So even though the Writers Guild was primarily fighting against the ability for a talent management company to do physical production, not a talent management, a talent agency to do physical production, didn't really look like that would happen anyway, but they needed to fight that battle. But they never gave up on saying, we don't like this whole idea of packaging. And everyone laughed, including me, saying there's no way that will go away. That's been around since the 80s. Yes, it did it was a contributing factor to the demise of Orion, the demise of Carolco, the demise of Vestron, the demise of all of the independent companies in Hollywood when the home video market collapsed overnight. So, and no one assumed that would happen. Well, guess what's happened? With the incredible pressure of what would happen if the Writers Guild went on strike in this era when the writers, for the first time ever, or the first time since the 1950s, have been appreciated appropriately and been paid appropriately. This is not the time that you want those writers to go on strike, especially since writers have been very good at staying on strike for a cause for long periods of time. Having been through a couple of them myself, I can tell you that they do that. All of a sudden, you started having the smaller of the big five say, you know what, we'll sign the agreement. Paradigm, UTA, I think ICM. The only two that are left that haven't signed it yet are William Morris Endeavor and CAA. What's been happening? Well, with COVID, without having physical production happening, all money has stopped. So pretty much all of the talent agencies right now have been hemorrhaging agents. Endeavor, William Morris Endeavor, lost a third. CAA lost a quarter. I think Paradigm is reconfiguring itself, so that's not good news. But meanwhile, these companies have signed the agreement, meaning packaging is going away. This is good news. It might not hit right away, but it's good news because it means that you can have independent producers coming in. You can have a focus on content as opposed to PowerPoint presentations that just say why you should remake this movie or you should do yet another relaunch of a franchise. This part of the business has now been skewered. So it's good news. How it's exactly going to shake down, we don't know yet. Further good news. The entertainment industry has always been very good at being able to adjust to any crisis and make things work. And already, despite the fact that so much of the town has been shut down, there have been all sorts of things that have been done to make shooting under COVID possible. Just like when sound came in, the studios were retooled within half a year. They've kind of figured it out now. It costs more. It's really hurt the independent producers. But for the big producers, saying that California, stops playing the games it's playing, shall we say. There's no reason why there should be any vacant stage space. There's no reason why you can't have content being made again. It's going to have to be different in terms of its creative end, but there's a lot of good news that's potentially going to be coming down the pike from this. One of the things they do is podding the set, meaning that you have a crew come in, do their job, disinfect, move out. Next crew comes in, does their job, moves out, disinfects. Main camera, video village with the stars and the director and the cinema, they come in and they can actually do their work. And so there is the isolation. It takes more time. It's going to cause scheduling issues based on old means, but is that necessarily a bad thing? For those of us who've been in the industry for any length of time, we can't dream of actually having a less than 14 to 16 hour workday. But other countries have done it. So maybe through this, we're going to see more responsibility. I'm not holding my breath, but there is a possibility. Why do I say there's more opportunity than ever? Because whenever anyone in the industry says it's worse than it's ever been, it's merely because it's changing. And when it changes, you have people who refuse to change. Those people are called unemployed. And often by the time they finally realize that they're not going to be able to stop the hands of time, it's too late. Their careers are done. So the people who are coming in, who are adaptable, because they don't know the old way of doing stuff, or at least it's not so ingrained that they can't possibly envision any other way. You're going to see those younger people who are willing to learn, who are willing to not rest on their laurels, come in and say, I'll do it. Now, I'm not saying doing anything criminal, obviously, or doing anything dangerous, but being willing to work for maybe a little bit less money, learn a new technology, learn a new computer program. It's happened with editors. It happened with cinematographers when digital came in. It's going to happen again. So I happen to be a beneficiary of one of those times when home video first came in and the studio system was in its final stages of totally breaking up. So I can tell you from personal experience, I've seen it. I see it happening now. So that's why you're just getting in the business. Be adaptable. Take your time thinking. And I think you'll be able to say to your students, I was that fat kid from Tokyo. Didn't necessarily have any kind of suave connections or wasn't necessarily soigné in my behavior. If I could become a vice president in a multinational corporation, what's your excuse? And you know what? The truth is, it can be. And now's the time to do it.
Wave your little hand and whisper so long, dearie, you ain't gonna see me anymore.